Okay, here we have my Blade 350QX, and I have mounted a gimbal. Primary reason being is that with the stock camera mount, you can see the 4 squares there up front of the craft, the weight, the payload, was so far forward of the center of gravity that I found the stock camera mount and the weight being that far forward caused a lot of shake in the video, primarily because that weight being cantilevered so far forward of the center of gravity caused the craft to have to work extra hard to maintain stability. So I wanted smoother video, so I went and installed a gimbal. Key features are the fact that I moved the entire thing back so it's pretty much hanging directly off the center of gravity. Initial test flights have shown that this really takes care of almost all of the vibration problem. The gimbal, you can use any gimbal you want. They're pretty much all the same. They do the same job. It's pretty standard technology, but it keeps the image locked, keeps the camera locked, so no matter how the craft tilts, the horizon is maintained level, and any changes in pitch, the camera compensates for that as well. So what you end up with is a rock solid image that's always oriented on the horizon. Now, I was initially a little bit dissatisfied because when this gimbal arms and it maintains perfect horizontal stability of the camera with the wide view of the camera and it being set further back, what I ended up finding is that the front of the front arms and the blades were visible in the picture. So what I was faced with was having to manually reposition either the sensor unit or put a wedge under the camera to somehow be able to achieve a little bit of a downward angle, which probably would have suited most of my purposes and just primarily gotten these front arms out of the shot. But anytime I wanted to change the angle of that camera, it would have been a bit of a challenge. So, options are this gimbal, and all gimbals come with output cable to be able to connect to channels on the controller so that you can independently control, most importantly, this angle, the pitch, and also the roll if you wanted to. I doubt you ever actually would, but this was the most important independent control for me. A couple of problems. First off, the 350QX does not have any outputs off the board to be able to achieve that. It doesn't matter what kind of radio you're using. They're simply, as far as I've been able to tell in my research so far, there's no way to get a signal off the board to be able to control the pitch independently of the camera. And the other complexity is that even if there was, I am relatively new to the hobby, so I'm still flying everything with a 6-channel DX6i, so I don't even have any spare channels to do this, even if I could. So I came up with a bit of a solution that may or may not help you. If you're anything like me and you've been in the hobby for any length of time, you've probably got a drawer full of old servos and receivers from things you've crashed. That's where my stockpile comes from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this spare receiver. I figured out a way to, although I can't really get a useful signal, to take power off the control board in the 350. And what I'm doing is I'm using a really old radio that's been sitting on my shelf for years. It's an old DX4E that I'm going to bind to this receiver, and I'm going to use it to independently control the pitch of the camera while it's in flight. Alright, so I'm going to pause for a second because I've only got one hand free. I'll be right back. Okay, so I have now connected the supplied cable to the controller board of the gimbal, and I've taken the outputs, which are designed to independently control the pitch and the roll of the gimbal, and I have attached them to this old AR610 receiver that I had lying around. And the only important connection here is that you want, or at least in my opinion, I want the pitch control, the independent pitch control, to be hooked up to the throttle output, specifically because the one control on the radio that isn't spring loaded and suitable for this type of adjustment is the throttle. The yellow wire you see here is the input to the gimbal control board for independent roll control. Now I'm definitely not going to be hooking that up when this is all said and done, because I don't really see a need to independently control that. I want the image to remain parallel with the horizon, but I would like to be able to alter the pitch of the camera. So my only remaining problem was how to supply power to this without adding, another battery or anything like that. So what I found was that on the control board of the 350, down in the bottom left, if you're looking through the battery compartment, there are two servo connectors. And what I found that they are for is they are servo outputs, and they move servos. They're tied directly to the control board's roll and pitch. So I can't really imagine a practical use for them, although theoretically you could make some kind of Frankenstein gimbal system that would be controlled by the 350QX. However, for our purposes, the only thing that's important is we now have a power source. So I just made up a jumper cable. So I measured it, it's right around 5 volts, maybe just a little under, but it is a servo output. So all we do now is take our our old Spectrum receiver, or any 6-channel receiver, and you can plug this, stealing power from the board on the 350, you can plug this into I guess any of them, because all that's important is getting power to the unit. So I'm going to select the rudder input, and like I say, all this plug for is getting power to the unit. So I'm going to pause again, connect the battery, fire everything up, and show you the end results. Okay, so here we are with everything powered up. Just a recap, what we have here is I have the power to the control board for the gimbal. I'm taking that off the balancing lead of the battery just because that's the simplest way to do it for my purposes. And like I showed you before, I've got that cable going to one of the spare outputs off the controller board, simply to get power to my receiver. You can see the orange light there. And I've got this receiver bound to this old DX4E radio. So what I've been able to accomplish again with the lead for the camera pitch connected to the throttle channel, you can see that I now have independent control of the pitch of the camera, which is absolutely perfect. Now, it might seem like a bit of a pain to have the second radio, but for my purposes it's fine, because all I'm concerned with is having it tilted down for high altitude and maybe just moving it up a little bit for low altitude passes, and again it gives me the ability to angle the camera so that I can get those front arms out of the way. Now for demonstration purposes, I have moved the control for the roll of the camera up to the aileron axis. But again, I'm not going to have that hooked up to anything because I'm not interested in flight in independently controlling the roll of the camera. So I am going to open this up. There's lots of room inside for me to tuck this extra receiver away and make it look all pretty. I'm not going to include that in this video because if you've gotten this far, you're able to do that on your own. A couple of key points. I've come up with my solution and I've only added 10 grams to the weight of the machine. Another point is, although I mentioned I'm using the DX6i and I have no spare channels, so I'm using this spare radio. You could, if you had a radio with more channels, you could bind this receiver as well as the 350QX to your one radio, and then you would have a spare channel to be able to assign maybe the flap channel or something. So you could do it all with the one radio using this second receiver. So anyway, I hope that helps. It certainly is a solution that's going to suit my purposes, and happy flying.